Good morning. Today is October 16th, and it's important to bear that in mind because since events are moving very quickly, some things I allude to may be outdated if you watch this several days later. So the topic for today is now what? And like most other people, I don't know exactly now what, but I do want to discuss some issues. And before I do, I want to say that if you're sick and tired of listening and watching the news um, and can't stand yet another program, I would like to encourage you to find Fareed Zakarian's Sunday morning CNN program, which I think is probably on YouTube by now, which I think is the single sort of best and most intelligent, coherent discussions of all aspects of what is currently going on in the Middle East, or at least what was going on in the Middle East as of last Sunday. So, where to start and where to end? I mean, it's not debatable whether the atrocities that took place in Israel were horrendous and that the world needed to stand up to it. Nor is it debatable anymore that the Israeli government fell down on its job, so consumed with its own internal politics that attention to information and the situation didn't seem to filter through to the cabinet and the prime minister. It is even known now that the Israelis were not entirely ignorant that Hamas was gearing up. It has now been reported that several military and others had gotten a little intelligence, maybe not enough, and had brought it to the attention of the government, which ignored the intelligence that was brought to them. But in any event, it is what it is, and the world rightly needs to stand up to the immorality of slaughtering innocent women and children and so on. I just want to make a small sort of asterisk here and say that the magnitude of what happened in Israel and the visibility on the media, because Israel is a modern country and Israel is important as an important country, certainly in the Middle East and in general, has focused all this attention. But actually, there's several places in the world where similar barbarity is taking place, and where small children and infants are also randomly killed. For example, in Darfur in the Sudan. And it has gotten almost no attention whatsoever. So the idea of, barbarity being executed by various groups in several countries in the world ought to get some additional attention after this particular conflict has been sorted out, because it is hard to imagine that in this century, people are walking around with machetes and knives, chopping off the heads of children, etc. And it's happening, as I said, in a number of places, though admittedly on a smaller scale, but also it doesn't get a lot of media attention in the United States. The fact that Israel has a right to defend itself is also not anything anybody is questioning. What, of course, is being questioned is what exactly is happening in Gaza as we speak, or has already happening, and what, if anything, the world can do about it or should do about it. You've no doubt read and heard a lot about this, so I won't beleaguer all the various issues surrounding this. Suffice it to say that there is in American history a small example of this, which was, if for those of you who recall, in Vietnam, where a village was destroyed, and it was said you had to destroy the village to save it. If you recall, the military in charge of that operation eventually was tried in court and found guilty. So barbarity has happened here, there, and yonder. The scale of this, and of course the level of involvement and competency of this on the part of Israel is in many ways staggering. It is also a question of whether or not Israel can accomplish the ends it's seeking. Destroying Hamas while you're destroying a small, poor enclave of Palestinians in the process may not be the answer to destroying Hamas per se, because in some ways a Hamas-like organization will rise again somewhere, maybe even in what is now Gaza. So the sheer magnitude of this, the sheer revenge of this, the sheer disregard for international humanitarian laws is quite staggering to be happening in this part of the century. Now, it's happened elsewhere, right? And we've either closed our eyes or said, well, we were not responsible, and so forth and so on. But what I guess comes to highlight here is that, after all, Israel is a modern, Western-oriented industrial country. And so the question arises, can and ought the revenge or the response to what happened in Israel, which obviously was horrendous and needs to be decried, can that in any way resolve the problems for Israel? I think many observers by now have cautioned and saying probably not. And here I want to back off for a minute and say that Gaza not only has 2.3 or so million Palestinians, but Gaza is also full of international representatives of international organizations and non-governmental organizations, which have over the years been busy in Gaza trying to run hospitals, trying to keep the population afloat in one way or another. And their inability to make inroads, that is to say, inroads in going back to their institutions and having those institutions have some serious discussions and express alarm about what was going on in Palestine, has either not been heard, or the institutions themselves have sought to sidestep and or don't have the capacity to intervene. Because especially after the Second World War, a group of both intergovernmental organizations, the United Nations, its special agencies, peacekeeping mechanisms in the United Nations, all kinds of UN agencies, one might have thought would have the capacity to act quickly and to put pressure on Israel to respond to its attack, while at the same time not putting a whole army of civilians at risk and doing what they're doing. So, for example, telling all the Gazans that they need to move south to the border with Egypt was, under the best of circumstances, a foolhardy mission. And if you look at the photos on the internet or on TV, you will see that even northern Gaza is heavily destroyed, right? The idea that people are being warned or leaflets are being dropped to get out of civilian apartment houses if they're targeted, because the Hamas also has an office there, is superficially looks like a reasonable thing to do to safeguard civilians, but in point of fact, those civilians have nowhere of going and can't get out fast enough, so they're getting killed. The other thing that's noteworthy about it is that half the population almost are children in Gaza. And what is happening to these children is equally horrendous in many ways to what was happening to the Israeli children that were killed and maimed and attacked. So here we have, an eye for an eye situation, and it is being covered up by saying, well, Israel, look what happened to Israel. It is justified in responding and knocking out of Hamas, and therefore, well, you just have, a couple of million people suffer. And many of them get killed and die because what Israel is actually doing is going after Hamas and trying to find those people and get rid of that organization. One should be reminded historically that even when an organization like Hamas is destroyed, very often a new version pops up if the underlying causes for the rise of such an organization is not remedied. And that gets me to the next question, not the question so much, but sort of editorial on the whole Palestinian situation. While the conflict is taking place and Israel is saying any moment now they're going to move in there, several other things are happening. One of the things, of course, will happen is that a lot of Israeli soldiers will also get killed. And the question is does that really make sense in this case? But the other question is, of course, there are other Palestinians. They are the Israeli Arabs, right, in Israel, who constitute whatever it is, 20% of the population, or some of whom are now getting attacked. But then there is the West Bank. And one could argue that in some ways, Hamas getting support for what it's trying to do in Gaza also comes from all of those in the world and in the West Bank who are, under siege from the settlers. Now, in the West Bank, without being able to go into a whole lot of detail here, the West Bank has large and ever-increasing Israeli settler population, very many of them very religious, and they're spreading out and developing more settlement. Meantime, the governing structure of the Palestinian in the West Bank is essentially non-functioning for a variety of reasons, good, bad, and indifferent. But while this stuff is going on in Gaza, I think it was 200 or more Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank by the settlers, right? So there's a small level of warfare going on there as well. So it's very messy. And no matter where one's sympathies lie, of course, the people who really suffer are the civilians, and in the case of Gaza, the children, and in the case of the West Bank, children, but also teenagers that get targeted. The teenager throws a stone in the West Bank, and a settler will just allow themselves to kill that teenager. A monumental and a very sad mess, and I really can't respond to the question or the topic of today, now what? But now what is not just in terms of Israel and the Palestinians. Now what also has to do with the rest of the Middle East. Because as you no doubt know, one of the arguments of why the Hamas was acting just now has been given because Israel and Saudi Arabia looked like they were going to make an agreement under US auspices, and increasingly Israel has been recognized in the Arab world. And so that has been at play, and there was every reason why organizations like Hamas and very much Iran wanted to stop this. Now, it has been said over and over again that Iran had no direct hand in the Hamas operation in Israel, and all sources so far have confirmed it. On the other hand, Iran is a busy actor in the Middle East, and has over the years supported Hamas as well as Hezbollah in Lebanon with arms, with technology, and so forth. It is also the case that some of the technology that has been used in Gaza apparently was actually manufactured in Gaza and wasn't just imported, but many of the component parts might very well, and the design might very well have come from Iran. So one of the multiple conflicts in the Middle East is between Sunnite and Shiite Muslims, right? And interestingly, which you probably know, is that the religious adherents in Gaza are in fact Sunni Muslims, while Hezbollah in the north are in fact Shiite Muslims. And of course, Iran is a Shiite country, right? So you have in the Middle East a conflict between the Sunni and the Shiite religious radicals, and different interests and competing interests for power. And while the centerpiece right now of this all is considered to be Israel and Gaza, the fact of the matter is that the concentric circles in the area also have involvement, also have stakes, and to varying degrees can be either a force for finding some kind of settlement before too many hundreds of other people get killed in Gaza, or can be obstacles. Now, it's interesting that our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who I have criticized in past talks, I thought, for example, his first meeting with the Chinese was horrendous and unfortunate, dressing the Chinese down in their first American meeting with the new Secretary of State. Made no sense whatsoever. But he has stepped into this with amazing energy and resolve. As you know, he is Jewish. Some of his family members suffered during the Holocaust, and he, like American and Biden, have supported Israel in what befell Israel. And on the other hand, you have noticed that both President Biden and very much Anthony Blinken has also said, okay, we are with Israel and the government of Israel, and we support them, and it's horrendous what's happened to them. But at the same time, to say, well, we need to figure out some way to consult with the various Middle East countries. And Anthony Blinken has been running around like a rabbit from one country to another, getting involvement and support and suggestions and input from various countries in the Middle East that are Muslim countries that to some extent are themselves concerned with a wider spread of the conflict throughout the Middle East. Now, somebody asked me the other day and said, why do we in the US even care about the Middle East? And I'm sure a lot of Americans who support Trump, etc., are saying to themselves, this is not our fight. I mean, it's too bad that all these people are getting killed and there's warfare somewhere, but this isn't really our battle. Well, let me remind ourselves that the Middle East is very central to energy, to transportation, to its location between Europe and the Near East, Africa, and the countries to the east of Iran, Turkey, and so forth. The Middle East has always been very central and very important. And one of the few benefits that might come out of all of this is more integration and discussion with the various Middle East countries, with the United States, European countries, for that matter, even Russia and China, about trying to stabilize that region and make some kind of sense out of it. I want to say that the moral questions here, in terms of what is happening in the next few days and what is happening in the past few days, raises questions which are usually not answered during conflict, but need to be on the agenda for the future. the immorality of attacking civilians in this way, not just in the Middle East, but in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and other places. And the unwillingness when actors are busy killing each other and governments are busy, or groups like Hamas are busy supporting chaos. The inability of the international system to act and to act quickly and effectively. That needs to be on the agenda in the world in the near future, and I actually hope to talk about that. But at the moment, it is what it is, and it is that because of the structure of the Security Council and the erosion of the international organizational system built after World War II, which needs to be reformed and revised if it's going to do any good, is one of the pitfalls of this particular situation. So you have pretty much individual diplomacy by the likes of Anthony Blinken instead of heavy-duty involvement by international institutions. And by that, is not just a short-term question about this particular conflict, but is a longer-term question about rebuilding Gaza, resolving the Palestinian situation, getting involved one more time in terms of a two-state solution, a long-term and a two-state solution for the Palestinians. Bereaved people like the Palestinians make trouble for everybody. And one might say that it's not just that the Palestinians have been a thorn in Israelis' side. The Palestinians have been a thorn in many of the Middle East countries in one way or another, either because of the conflict or because before even the 1948, the role they played in various countries. So the Palestinians are not necessarily popular in many parts of the Middle East, believe it or not. But it's also a situation that the Palestinian situation needs to be resolved before other circumstances in the Middle East can be addressed and resolved. The one good thing that I would say is that there is now a consensus, I think, amongst most Middle East countries and most Middle East leaders, almost all of whom, by the way, are authoritarian leaders, that the medium term and long term issues absolutely need to be addressed before you have, self-destruction everywhere and periodically. And of course, each time there is a conflict and a war, it gets more dire, it gets more inhumane, it gets whatever. That makes it unsafe for everybody. So, for example, Egypt right now is caught in something of a vice. They need to open the border and get some help in. First, they didn't want to open the border on their side. Now they're willing to open it in a limited way on their side. But now the Israelis, and to some extent even Hamas, are barring people from leaving and getting some kind of help in. The magnitude of this disaster is huge, both in Israel and how it's going to change the country in Israel, and also in Gaza, of course, but also in the Middle East in general. So, can one make a prediction? I don't think so. Does the U.S. and other countries in Europe and other major powers need to get involved? Yes. Can the human disaster be rectified? I think it's too late for that. What about Israel? Well, Israel now has something of a coalition government, and of course, one can't say anything bad about its prime minister at the moment. But I think the reckoning in Israel amongst Israelis and Israeli Jews, not just Arabs, Palestinians in Israel, will have to come. And so the future of politics in Israel and the role that Israel can and might and ought to play will also be on the front burner. A lot of uncertainty from minute to minute. Almost everything I have said might be outdated by the time you listen to this, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the sorts of issues that leap to mind about that part of the world. And finally, I want to say that whatever one may think of President Biden and his administration, on this particular issue so far, they have played their hand well. They're engaged, they've been intelligent about it, they care about Israel, they care about the human disaster, both for the Israelis and the Palestinians. And remarkably, they have a Secretary of State right now who seems to be effective, or as effective as he can be, and has risen to the occasion of playing the proper role of the U.S. in this mess. For Americans who say it's far away, we don't much care, you can't take that position, either because a major power can't take that position, but also given America's history in the world, it can't take that position. And finally, it can't take that position because it is a country of people from different origin. They're Arab, Palestinians, non-Arabs who are not Palestinians, they're Jews, all living in the United States, who deeply care, who are deeply affected by it. So that is a motivation for the US to step in. But the motivation is also duplicated or triplicated by the fact that you can't just let this kind of slaughter happen in some part of the world without paying some attention to it. But it should also teach America the lesson that slaughters on a slightly smaller scale are happening in various parts of Africa, in various parts of Asia as we speak. And those two need to be addressed, because if you take a stand against the that in the 21st century, humans ought not to have their heads cut off and children killed, then you need to take that as a both national and international stance, and you need to get more active on this particular issue. So stay tuned. The world is a mess. And I think as Americans, it's absolutely essential that we stay informed. We are a party to world affairs, and we can't just decide that we're living in Kansas and the whole thing doesn't matter. All we care about is whether the price of our food is going up. It's a very sad, very traumatic situation for many people right now. We need to give our best thoughts to their survival. Thank you.